Hello, everybody, back with another episode. So, do you ever wonder why people get so ticked off from the most minor inconveniences today? Like, everybody in society seems generally unkind, selfish, and angry these days. But at first, I thought it was just like the hustle and bustle of the modern life. But there might be more intricate psychology to it than I had previously thought. In 1840, a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville traveled throughout America to make observation on the health of its democracy. He compared and contrasted with the health of democracy back at his homeland in France. Both the French Revolution and American Revolution were similar in nature, as it was an example of societies evolving from monarchy to republic, and its people graduating from being a king's subject to free individual citizens. It was a subject of great interest to people at the time because building a republic had not been attempted since the ancient times of Greece and Rome. People leading themselves. Tocqueville observed a funny common phenomenon in these two societies that shifted from the oppression of kingship to free republic. People were generally angrier and feeling more frustrated. This phenomenon became known as the Tocqueville effect or Tocqueville paradox because it was counterintuitive to common sense. How could increase in rights and opportunities negatively affect your happiness? Are you saying that Hitler was right all along? Are you supposed to enslave everybody so they will be happy again? First factor making us unhappy is expectation. The transition from monarchical society to republic society requires enforcing the idea of equality. But this concept of equality is exactly what kills a democracy because people start having unreasonable and convoluted expectations of it. Inequality is a fact of life and it is present in all forms of societies, but in a society that fancies itself an equal and uniform one, the idea of someone being even slightly ahead offends the public greatly, if not the person right next to you. The only difference between medieval times and our times is that back in the day they were more honest about inequality. They accepted it. They knew that the world they created was a non-uniform one. On the contrary, in a democratic society, the official narrative promises that the society shall be uniform one from now on. But these promises and illusions of equality are broken in all the technical and natural ways possible, eventually leading to a creation of a society that isn't much different from the one you left. Like, you got rid of greedy lords just to get greedy CEOs, right? Like, it's not too different. The difference is that the medieval society's threat of oppression could be taken literally and honestly, while democratic society's promise of freedom has to be taken with a base alloy of hypocrisy. And then this really tires people out. This cognitive dissonance from the official narrative and the reality you observe, it causes more discontent and frustration because the promise feels broken. In a society where fist was enough for a reason, this would have been okay, but in a supposedly uniform society like democracy, people feel like they deserve an explanation and a compensation. In the wise words of J. Cole, like, tell me why I ain't got shit. And if there is ever a redeeming quality about inequality, it is that it becomes far less noticeable the greater it gets. Like the smell of cat piss in your girlfriend's house. So let me give you an example. Billionaire Elon Musk existing wouldn't cause me too much grief or anger cause like, man, I'll like never be as successful as that guy. I sleep. But if my coworker gets $1 raise and I didn't, that's real shit, you know? So, moral of the story here is that when inequality is so great, it doesn't even matter at a certain point. If this was a marathon, Elon would be so far ahead of me, he would be out of my sight, so I wouldn't care. But if there's a guy running at similar pace as me, just next to me, I get the feeling like I could overtake this guy's position. overwhelming and astounding inequality, especially when it has an element of the unattainable, arouses far less envy than minimal inequality, which inevitably causes the envious to think, I might have been in his place. In other words, the best means of protection against the envy of a neighbor is to drive a Rolls Royce instead of a car only slightly better than his. He will realize that he is out of the league and bugger off.
He is my neighbor, Nur Sultan Tuliakbay. He is paining my assholes. I get a window from a glass, he must get a window from a glass. I get a step, he must get a step. I get a clock radio, he cannot afford. Great success.
And that's why Tocqueville called rights and freedom the type of food that makes you more hungry more you eat it. Having more rights was pissing people off because they expected those rights to be grand, but they really aren't to shit. Inequality still existed, it just got a new skin. So the root of resentment in democratic society comes from the fact that the government yaps all the time about shit being equal, but our realities are modeled with power differences, exploitation with extra steps, and spinning the narratives to make stealing feel democratic. In the free world's historical narrative, man was born into oppression and ignorance, and history is the story of humanity's journey into enlightenment and freedom, leaving behind all the bad shit he was born into. This is a concept called Whig historiography, and it's like the unspoken axiom of most Western historical disciplines, and this is kinda what college history professors teach to the college students, and then that's what they believe. But if you spent a day in full-time job, you know this shit isn't even like remotely true. Human progress is not linear, as they say, and the rights can be taken away. If progress isn't even an illusion, that is, right? And that's a pretty big if by itself. And what kind of freedom do you really gain by like being chained to a desk 8 hours a day anyhow? We got the current generation wanting to return to monkey, you know? We are at a point where people are reevaluating whether the modern person is really freer than the medieval person or an ancient person even. But apparently in this Whig historiography narrative, everybody's getting rights. Gays are getting rights, blacks are getting rights, Asians are getting rights, Jews are getting rights, and women are getting rights, and everybody should be happy. But in a lot of ways, this freedom stuff becomes like keeping up with the Joneses, and that's just like the example of the marathon I gave earlier, where somebody out of sight doesn't really cause you envy, but somebody running next to you can. And the different factions are pissing each other off by advancing their own agenda. No faction is genuinely happy for another faction when they get a W from the system. It's more like, where's my W, bitch? I want it and I want it now. So in other words, societies become fragmented and tribalized. And in the end of the day, a bullet fired has to go somewhere, and then social frustration has to go somewhere. And then these frustrations gather in these like anti-intellectual HubSpots where emotional venting is celebrated and facts get ignored. And people with like similar problems are likely to band together to voice their demands to the system so that it can change in their favor. And that's just like a built-in feature in humanity and democracy. Like that's not anybody's fault. And however, that like problem is when digital age allows for heuristics of a people gathering under banner of emotional rancor more than reason and rationality. People band together on online platforms to vent their frustrations and demonize their opposing factions rather than trying to rationally understand the dynamics of the problem and suggesting a reasonable solution to it. For example, we got like people like Redditors and liberalized college students whose sphere of interaction is so limited to their own narratives that they are incapable of hearing out any opposing ideas, and then they galvanize a certain form of radical views that are just like not checked by other realities of other stakeholder groups in that very issue they claim to have figured out. Well, they don't interact with these people to begin with, so how would they know? And by the nature of such group, they devolve into like an anti-intellectual state where radical ideas are met with appreciation and support, while reasonable opposition and criticisms are met with violence and the threat, as well as like false accusation. Like it is like very type of like community that Isaac Asimov addressed in his critique to anti-intellectualism. A community where my ignorance weighs just as much as your informed opinion. And this phenomenon represents the loss of ability to have rational discussion in a society. And in the end of the day, democracy is a system of compromise, and prerequisite to a compromise is rational discussion. So this society is displaying symptom of a democracy that has lost its ability to perform certain democratic functions pertaining to rationalism. And you could say that it's beginning of a mob rule rather than like a true democracy. And the reason these fringe factions become so fervent and crazy is because they are desperate to win, but progress is designed to be slow in democracy. In other words, they are impatient. Also, democracy is a system where landslide victories are rare, if not non-existent. But perhaps due to polarization, people these days want like a landslide victory for their cause, and then they get like super baffled when someone doesn't agree with their voting direction or value or priorities. And then democratic system makes you view your neighbor antagonistically when they don't align their views with your own. It's almost like an innate bug in the system. That's because like citizens are so insignificant in large democracies that they feel powerless and anxious when voting alone into a cause, and the people who like aren't with my cause is technically against my cause. And if that cause is dear and near to you, you feel very like robbed personally and like attacked. So when someone who won't understand like your quote unquote like obvious rhetoric of your side, you get like really like ticked off, I guess. Yeah, I think that's like one of the things I observe out of both sides. And when others can't be convinced, the people resort to pulling on the sleeves and pant legs of like larger institutions to solve their problems for them, and therefore losing the autonomy and like self-governance that citizens ought to be entitled to. It makes a person really annoying in the end of the day. This is like where the cancel culture comes from, right? Because like, oh, I gotta silence this guy because he doesn't agree with me. Like they see something they don't like, and their immediate reaction is to like appeal to a larger authority who could like hurt that people meaningful ways. And then like, he put on like a hurtful display, and then like, you should punish him. It's immoral for him to do that. Like it's just like, I don't know, it just makes a person really annoying in the end of the day. So in summary, we came to like a day and age where you can't just like nail a persuasive letter on the town hall message board and have the townsfolk mind changed. You know, those days are gone, right? We got the modern info war age where you gotta make like these like spicy viral propaganda to outrage millions against your political enemy, like angry wasps and stuff like that. And whether these viral messages are true or not, people are starting not to care anymore. As long as it hurts the other guy, who cares if it's true? And then we are at that stage at the end of democracy. And I guess the truth is that every faction feels so small and atomized in this like shit that they feel like they gotta resort to spreading lies and like pointing fingers to have their ways. It's really childish and petty if you really think about it. Well, that's my opinion on why people are so unhappy in a democracy. I think people have too high of an expectation of democracy to begin with. I think they think that it is some kind of recipe to build a paradise, and they get very dismayed when their version of paradise isn't what's presented on the plate. But never forget that democracy isn't just like some holy institution we should worship. It's like got its own setbacks and flaws, and this is just one of them. And if we choose to go with it, we gotta work with it. And I don't know if future societies will continue to choose democracy, but I think one thing is for certain. We live in a timeline where the strange problems innate in democratic systems are starting to bear fruits, even stranger still. And we are very, very pissed off.